All right, so I'm gonna talk about some things you should do when designing your letter. Okay, so first of all, you can do little miniature sketches. Okay, you don't want to go right away and try to draw on the big piece of paper. Okay, because remember your finished product's going to be roughly 9 by 12. Anywhere in there, 8 by 10, 9 by 12, anywhere in that size is what your finished product's going to be. But for the sketches, you don't want to, do your sketches on big paper and waste a bunch of paper trying to get it exactly right. So I listed them as preliminary sketches. A lot of times we refer to them as thumbnails. Okay, and so obviously that's a thumbnail right there, right? And one of my professors used to always say that it came from artists. There's one particular artist had a really big thumbnail, and I guess he'd go out on the street and draw a little sketch, and then come back and work from that little thumbnail sketch, right? Because a long time ago, paper was kind of hard to get, more difficult to get. So that's where the apparently the saying comes from. I thought he was crazy, but I think I think he's probably right. So what these little rectangles and shapes here kind of represent is the paper, right? So your paper is supposed to be roughly 9 by 12. So the idea is that you want your sketch, you're kind of creating the frame, right? We talked about frame. So you're creating the frame. This represents your paper. Okay, that's landscape mode, that's portrait mode, right? And then over here, if you notice, I did something wrong, right? So if I want my finished product to be roughly 9 by 12, which is more of a rectangle, what's wrong with this one? Well, it's a square, right? So we don't really want to do that because that's not the size, not the ratio that we need. So if you draw something in here and it looks awesome, it's not really going to fit in the rectangle, okay? Because you drew it in a square. And then same thing here, like this is a really panoramic landscape mode, right? So it's a little bit too, it's not very tall, it's really wide. So if you try to fit this into, say this one over here, it's not going to work very well either. So you just got to really pay attention when you're doing the rectangles, okay? And so for the most part for this one, your letter, you're going to be doing, like I said, portrait mode. That's going to work better. Okay, but sometimes, if you want to try to draw it horizontally and fit the letter in there, landscape mode can work too. Okay, so remember, what do we need? We need your letter to take up 50% of the space. Okay, so 50% is the letter, and then 50% is also the negative space. Okay, so the idea is your letter takes up just as much space as what's going to be empty. Okay, and then you need it to touch all four sides. Because the idea is you're going to design this letter and you're going to make it, basically making your own font. You're going to make a really cool looking font. But you're trying to design it so it fits the space, again, be 50-50, and then you're going to do something with the leftover pieces. So you're going to make a bunch of sketches and try to, arrive at some kind of letter that looks good and fits the parameters of the assignment, and that's what you'll submit this week. And then I'll take a look at those and give you some feedback, and then I'll have you create the actual letter. And like I said, when you draw the letter on the paper and then cut it out, you're going to have leftover pieces. And so the way you get leftover pieces is by having it touch all four sides. Okay, so it'll need to touch, again, the left and right, the top and the bottom. And then also you're going to want to have where there would be at least 5 leftovers. You really don't want to have too many more than that. I'll put leftover pieces. Okay, so, somewhere between, honestly, like 5 to 7. You don't really want more than 7 leftover pieces. Around, like 5 or 6 is better, okay? You really don't want 4. Again, you kind of want 5 to 7, really 5 to 6 leftover pieces. Okay, so what I mean by that, and let's use the letter, we'll use the letter R, okay? So if I, let's say I'm going to draw a letter R. If I do this and I'm like, okay, I draw this and I make this awesome looking thing, right? I know this sketch isn't really good, but let's say I come up with a really cool creative font. I don't know, I get all crazy with it. It has all these really cool things on it and got these little shapes, and and again, let's just pretend this is some amazing looking font that I spent hours on drawing, right? I got something that I love. All right, there we go. Okay, I'm ready to go. No, I'm really not. Okay, so you look at all this empty space. It's not going to give me 5 leftover pieces. It'll give me one giant one and then a second little tiny one. Because again, I'm not touching all 4 sides. Okay. So I don't know, I'll draw it in this little box over here, right? So this is where you have to kind of play around with it. So I do want it to touch the left side. So, I could do something like this, right? So, okay, it's touching over here, and again, I know this isn't the most creative font. I'm just drawing a letter, just trying to show you. Yeah, let's see, there we go. Okay. So probably a terrible font, but but it's drawn in there. Okay. So now I'm touching the left, I'm touching the top, I am touching the bottom, I'm touching the right side. Okay. But again, the problem is, first of all, like if I were to draw this on, say, a piece of construction paper, or you guys can use your black paper. If I drew this on the black paper, then I cut it out, I'll have 1, 2, 3, and 4 leftover pieces. Okay. So, again, I want at least 5, about 5. So that leaves me 1 short, but also too, when I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, it's probably taking up a little more than 50% of the space. Okay, so I didn't meet that, but I'm probably a little bit more, like the letter's probably taking up like 70% of the space. And then I don't quite have the 4 pieces left over. Okay, so this is where you gotta get kind of creative. Again, you can get creative with the font. So you could do something where, and again, I'm just gonna do some type of letter here. It's probably gonna be a terrible font, and because I'm just sort of making it up. I could do something like this. And there we go. Okay, that's some kind of letter R. And again, I'm just doing a little quick sketch here. And then see, a lot of times students try to get these really, really creative looking fonts, and they look great, but then what ends up happening is you have a bunch of teeny tiny leftover pieces. So you got to balance that out. You got to design something that looks good, but again, you want about 5 pieces left over. Okay, like I drew this on construction paper or my black paper, and then cut it out. Look, there we go. We got 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, and there's 6. Okay, so again, like I said, 5 to 6 is good. And then what I got to look at too is that, is my letter taking up 50% of the space and then 50% is the negative? And I'm actually probably not bad. I might be a little bit over. I might be more like 55%. The letter is occupying 55% of the space, and then probably a little 45 on the negative. Okay, and that would be okay. But if I want to, maybe like my letter is a little too big, I can always do things like this. So if I kind of thin some things out, okay, see, like I kind of move that over a little bit there, right? Let's see, even over here, okay. Okay, so there's the edge of the paper, right? It's still touching. So I made that a little bit bigger. And again, I didn't adjust it much, but I mean, you can see what I mean. Like, let's I go even a little more than that. Okay, so say I made that a little bit bigger, that a little bit bigger, that a little bit bigger. So by just moving the lines around, you can adjust, how thick the letter is compared to the, or how big the letter is by adjusting the thickness. of the pieces. You can kind of play around with it and adjust how much space it takes up. Okay, so I'll have another one here. Because let's say I did the opposite. Say I drew, and I'll kind of draw the same thing here. But I'm going to go really, really thin here. Because students will do this a lot of times too. Will make their letter really skinny. And so again, that's the trick, and that's kind of the challenge for this assignment, is making it where the empty space is occupying 50% of it, and then the letter is occupying 50% of it. Or again, something really, really close. And so see, I made the letter really thin. And so there we go, I still have the same amount of shapes left over. Okay. And again, what ends up happening, I am touching all four sides. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, I do have, my, 5 to 6, which I think is ideal. Okay. Leftover pieces, right? I just numbered them. But now what's happening is the letter is, probably more like 30% of the space, and then the negative space is now like 70%. So again, I made it a little bit too thin. And so, like I said, you can adjust things. So if you got something you like in your sketch, just, again, adjust how thick the lines are. And then something else you want to think about too is you want all your leftover pieces to be roughly the same size. Like, they don't have to be exactly the same size, but you don't want, like, say this shape right here to be massively huge compared to the rest of them. And I'll kind of sketch one out and show you what I mean here. Okay, so, and again, all I'm showing you here is you can just, by redrawing some of the lines in your sketches, you can, definitely change the, how much space it takes up to make it be the 50-50. Okay, so watch, I'll just grab another piece of paper here. And I don't know, I'm just gonna draw right here. Okay, so let's say, I'm doing a similar design and I can sort of see it through the paper here. So I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna show you if I did something way different. So like, okay, well, let me kind of clean it up a little bit. I think the graphite stick in this little mechanical pencil is kind of going on me here. And then, yeah, you guys can sketch these, and I would just use pencil. I'm using a mechanical pencil, but a regular one is fine. Just something you can sketch with quickly and erase quickly. It'll work just fine. Let me grab a different one. There you go, this one. Okay. So as you can see, I still have sort of the same thing, right? I don't remember how I numbered them. I think I numbered them like this. Okay. And so again, I can play around with this and get it to be where the letters, taking up, occupying 50% of the space, and then of course the negative space takes up the rest of it, right? Now if you notice, what happens is that this one shape is really big compared to the rest of them. Okay, so I don't really want that. I want them to be a similar size. Of course, they can be different sizes. But if you have one that's really big, it's going to make part B more difficult. Okay, because really what you're doing, you're designing a letter. You can, play with your sketches until you get something that, you know, works really well, and then you'll draw it on the big paper, you'll cut it out, and then you'll glue it on one of the backgrounds. Okay. And then of course you're going to have a second background that's the same color, right? Same color as the first background. And then you're going to have these leftover pieces. Okay, you have leftover pieces. And then that's where I'm going to have you kind of rearrange them a few times. Okay, so like step one, you'll arrange them. I think I have it where it looks like the negative space, and then you take a picture, and then you'll rearrange again those leftover pieces a second time to look like a positive shape. Take a photo, and then you will rearrange them a third time to where it's kind of unclear as to what's positive and negative. Sorry. And you know, and it's going to be similar to what some of the things you saw in the slides, the slideshow I put up there. Okay, so when you have to, you know, use these leftover cutout pieces and rearrange them on the page, if one of them is really big, it's kind of hard to move it around. Okay, and then if you have a bunch of teeny tiny ones, then what ends up happening is you're really fighting to move them around because there's these little tiny thin pieces of paper. Okay, so that's what I mean. You want the letter to take up 50% of the space, and then the negative space to be, you know, again, 50% of the space. You do want it touching all four sides, and you can see again, if you don't have it touching all four sides, then you can't have separate pieces. You'll have like one massive piece, and then maybe a little small one. Okay, and that's not going to work. That's why you want it touching all four sides. See how like right here where it touches, now it separates these two. Instead of having one big piece, you have two. It touches here and here, so now it separates those two. Okay, it touches here, right? So now it actually kind of separates those. And then of course I have one in the middle because I just chose the letter R. And you can pick whatever letter you want. Certain ones are more difficult, okay? Like the letter I, the letter L, some of those are more difficult. To make this work where you actually get, you know, 5 to 6 pieces left over. But like the letter R, K, M, you know, there's pretty much any of them. And if you get more creative with the font, that will work. You can always, you know, make things work. But anyways, I'm kind of, you know, getting off topic here. You want the letter to be 50%, space negative, you know, the negative space to be 50%. If it touches all four sides, that's what helps you get, you know, again, your 5 to 6 leftover pieces. Okay. Again, part of it is designing an interesting, creative looking letter that fits that parameter. Okay. Those of you that ever go into graphic design, you know, there is some parameters sometimes when you're designing a logo or a letter or a font. And that's kind of the trick here. You do something that's creative, but again, it, you know, takes up 50% of space, and it gives you pieces that are going to be usable for when you do part B. Okay. Other things you can do, and again, I'll just kind of use the same letter R, and I'll just kind of, you know, doodle out some really quick things here. You know, if you want to have it kind of at an angle and diagonal, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you can get really creative with the direction. Okay, and so like, you know, I'm not really liking this one. These shape, you know, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exactly 5 shapes. That's better. You know, but I'd have to mess around with this some more to get, you know, to get it to meet the 50% of the space. And I probably want to flare this up a little more. I want to add some little, you know, maybe some little like angles and pointy parts. Just so my font doesn't look so boring. You know, and when you're designing your font, it can be more geometric and like angular. It can be more, you know, flowing and smooth. There's not really one way to do it, but you know, you want something that isn't too generic, but at the same time, like I said, if you get really, really creative where it's got all these little weird shapes, instead of having, you know, your 5 to 6, 5 to 7 pieces left over, you might have like 12, which is not going to work for part B. It's not going to make part B work as well for you. And so, like I said, it could be more fluid. It could look like a cursive letter, you know, and have this kind of kind of form to it where it doesn't look all that great, but you know what I mean. See how it's a little more curvy. It could be a lot more angular. And again, you get to pick the letter. I just happen to choose the letter R because I just thought it would work well for the example here. And again, you could do something that's very sort of geometric. I don't know how geometric that got right there, but okay, and I don't really like how the inside came out there. You get what I mean? Like you can, you're the one who gets to choose the style. Okay. Could be, geometrics and very flowing. It could be a combination of the two. Okay, and you can see again, I drew it kind of at an angle here. On the original ones, it's it's more straight up and down. Right here, I have it, a little bit diagonal. You can play around with that. It doesn't have to be at exactly, straight up and down. And you can see this first one, that first one's not gonna work. It's just kind of boring and stale, and it doesn't really give me the amount of pieces I need. So I had a little tail at the end there. I could have made that smaller. I could have made it bigger. See, I tried to make something kind of pointy here. There's all kinds of things you can do. And, to help you, feel free to look up different fonts. I mean, you can look in like Photoshop and Word for different fonts, but you can just search some on the internet. I don't want you to copy one exactly, but, use it for inspiration. Use it to help you draw your letter. And again, to make it touch all four sides, take up 50% of the space, and then give you, ideally like five to six pieces left over. Okay, no more than 7. Again, that's about it. So if you draw a little too thin, do like I did, where you start moving the lines. If you draw a little bit too big, then you can kind of move the lines the other way. And then you just have to visually judge and see, like, okay, is my letter occupying 50% of the space? Is the negative space occupying 50% of the space? And if it's really close, that's fine, okay? If it's like a 45, 55, or, somewhere in there, it's okay. You just don't want your letter so massive that there's little tiny pieces left over. And then you don't want your letter so thin that there's a ton of leftover pieces that will really make it difficult to do part B, okay? So that's going to be it. Again, choose any letter you want to. Some will be easier than others. So if you really want to do your initials, say, first name or last name, feel free to do that. Just come up with a really good design. And again, for this, you're just going to be submitting the sketch. So even if it's just a small sketch, draw a bunch of them. I think I do at least 6. I don't remember what I put on there. But do a few of them, and then make sure you highlight which one is the one that you think that you really want to go with for the final version. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.